Inspired Pilot Podcast, episode 25. We're back.
People that are learning to fly have some fear and then they stop, but really it's for your evolution. And if you can get past that fear, then you open your life up to more.
Inspiring stories from inspiring pilots from around the world. Welcome to the Inspired Pilot Podcast with your host, Marvin Robinson.
Okay, welcome to the Inspired Pilot Podcast. This is Marvin Robinson, and I'm delighted to introduce today's featured inspiring pilot, Robert DeLaurentis. Okay, welcome to the show, Robert. Are you ready to inspire today?
I'm ready to inspire today, Marvin. Thank you for having me on your show.
Robert DeLaurentis, the ZEN pilot, is a noted aviation speaker and author with over 1,400 flight hours. Robert has his visual, instrument, and multi-engine ratings and holds a commercial pilot certificate as well as an advanced graduate degree in spiritual psychology. Robert completed a circumnavigation of the planet in August 2015, where he visited 23 countries and 5 continents, crossing 12 oceans and seas. This record-setting flight in the spirit of San Diego is the topic of his Amazon bestseller called ZEN Pilot, Flight of Passion, and The Journey Within. Okay, Robert, I've given our listeners, the Inspired Pilots, a short introduction there. Can you take a minute and tell us a little bit about yourself personally? And before we jump deeper into your journey, can you just give us a brief overview of what you're doing aviation-wise right now?
Sure. I am from the East Coast of the United States, a place called Salamanca, New York, but my home is San Diego, California. And I am, as we're speaking right now, looking at Lindbergh Field, where I departed on my circumnavigation, and of course, where Charles Lindbergh, his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, was built. But I retired from the real estate business about a year and a half ago, and decided that I would focus my attention on aviation. And I was able to do that because I had written a book about some spiritual concepts I employed in my business, and it tripled in size, and that really fueled the aviation pursuits. It gave me the time and money to plan and execute this circumnavigation of the planet in the Spirit of San Diego. Now, don't get me wrong, I had 37 sponsors, but having the time and the resources to fly is also an important part of that. And since I got back, I wrote a second book. The first one's called Flying Through Life. The second one is called ZEN Pilot, Flight of Passion, and The Journey Within. And I've been lecturing for the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. This is going to be my second year at all their fly-ins at Oshkosh and Sun and Fun. I have done 7 video segments for AOPA, written many articles, and right now I'm starting to plan a pole-to-pole flight from the South Pole to the North Pole in a new aircraft that's called the Citizen of the World, which is a Turbo Commander 900 made by Gulfstream. And right now we're just outfitting it with 2 5-bladed props from MT, first ever put on a Turbo Commander. So we are calculating distances and routes, talking to sponsors, trying to anticipate all the issues that are going to be coming up for that flight.
Fantastic. Wow. Well, in terms of immersing yourself in aviation there, it sounds like you are really knee deep in it all. And I'm looking forward to delving deeper into your journey, just so we can at least touch the tip of the iceberg there. No pun intended with the pole trip. That one's for free. Basically, you've mentioned a few things there, so we'll definitely get into that. But let's talk about your journey. So every story has to start somewhere. You've mentioned the iconic Lindbergh Field and a couple of iconic trips there, but every journey does have to start somewhere. So it sounds like you've left real estate in the past, but where did your journey start? How did you get into aviation in the first place?
Well, I believe that most pilots are born pilots. And I had an interest in flying since the very beginning. When I was a little boy, I was building model planes, eventually string control planes, that are gas powered, and then radio controlled planes. And I remember as a child driving by the airport in California here in a place called San Carlos and just being glued to the window. And it wasn't until I got to be age 46 that I actually had the resources of time and money to become a pilot, but it was this passion that, burned inside me, and I just couldn't make it happen until later in my life. So I've been flying for just over 6 years now, and it's something I'm trying to make available to young pilots with scholarships from the money we raise. But yeah, flying, it was never a matter of if, but when.
I think a lot of the guests that I've had on the show so far seem to have a little seed that's sown when they were younger in their youth. And it definitely shows you that different circumstances and everyone is on their own path. Some people from 18 go down the commercial route straight away. They know you've obviously negotiated 46 years of your life in business before you jumped on the bandwagon, as it were. But at 46 years old, what was the driver? What switched? You mentioned time and resources. Was it just a case of money, or was it time, or was it a bit of both, or was it, from my point of view, I remember having a healthy, it was definitely a money thing, but I had a healthy fear of, I remember saying to my neighbor who inspired me that I didn't want to die. That was what I actually said, which I cringe when I say that now because of what I know, but that was an actual thought. But he said, Marvin, what do you want to do? Do you want to get old and regret it? And then that was just the thing that just tipped me over. So what tipped you over? Tell me your story.
Sure. Before I start that, let me tell you that my lectures this year for AOPA will be about overcoming fear as a pilot and in your life, because, we all have some fear that holds us back. I wanted to be a pilot, and I started down the spiritual path, and I was trying to manifest that in my life. And if you ask to become a great painter, you don't wake up the next morning a great painter. You wake up and you might remember that you had some paint that you hadn't used, and maybe your neighbor is going to show up and give you some canvas or something to draw on or paint on. And it seems like a series of synchronicities. And then with these opportunities and persistence and effort, you develop as a painter. For me, as a potential pilot, the universe gave me these spiritual concepts that I employed in my business. And then, like I said, I was eventually able to make it profitable enough to have that time and resources to do it. So it really, I guess, if anything, you could say it started with a prayer.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, it might be interesting to hear how you brought the spiritual context into flying. So we'll touch on that. Okay. So 46 years old, you've had that prayer. You've decided that, hey, I'm going to jump in and take lessons. So tell us that process. How was your training and how did you get on with it?
I started a mentor in my life, a woman who was a business mentor, spiritual mentor, and was taking flying lessons. And she sort of lovingly encouraged me along. And we bought joint ownership in a Cessna 182. And it was just too big and too fast for me to learn on. And it spooked me. This was before, the spiritual journey I just mentioned. So my resources dried up a little bit. And then I stopped for a number of years. Stopped taking lessons. And then another buddy of mine took me up flying in a Beechcraft Bonanza, and we went over to Palm Springs here in California, and that sort of reignited the spark. And from there, pretty consistently, I started with my VFR training, the book work, the instructors.
Yeah.
And I was not a fast study. I think I had about 60 hours before I got my VFR license. It wasn't, the most impressive process. I think I flunked my first exam. The little hook on the back of the Cessna 172 that you used for a tie down.
Yeah.
I scraped it landing,
Ouch.
Instant fail.
Yeah. The instructor just looks at you and you look at him and you both don't say anything, know what's going to happen next. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. So, the process is not always graceful and it's not always easy, but it's something that I'll probably look back on my life and say, the fact that I was a pilot was one of the, biggest accomplishments, I would say, of my life.
Fantastic. So you were 60 hours wiser at the end when you got your license. Looking back now, what was the biggest challenge that you had during your actual training, and how did you overcome that challenge?
The thing that scared me the most was talking on the radio. You would key the mic, you'd hear the hissing, and then you would know that everybody for 50 to 75 miles, including commercial airline pilots, the seasoned air traffic controllers, tower operators, instructors, probably somebody that as well is listening to you. you know?
Yeah.
And you have that cotton mouth, and there's certainly a language that pilots speak. And I got choked up, you know, I just couldn't get the words out. And yeah, so eventually, you know, the fear goes away, and just practice, pushing through the fear, knowing that that's something you want to do, and that it's worth, you know, dealing with the issues that come up for you.
I totally agree with that as well. I remember they tried to introduce the radio work, as it were, quite early because they wanted you to be ready for your solo. And I was rattling through the hours and it was approaching solo, and I had to nail it. I totally understand what you were saying, where you key that mic and it's like game on kind of thing. And for me, I bought a scanner and tuned into my local stations, and I was just listening to others and sort of practicing in the car and stuff. But yeah, totally agree with that. That's quite challenging.
You know, the other thing too is I would say if you're not sure what to say, just say it in plain words. You don't have to abbreviate it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're just communicating. And then with time, as you've heard enough people do it in a particular way, then you'll adjust. But there's no reason to think you have to get it exactly right the first time.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Yeah. And like you said previously, persistence. So if you're persistent and you practice, then good things always come to those who wait. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you've actually touched on a few aircraft there. So I've got the Cessna 182, Bonanza. So let's just do a quick roundup before we continue on with your journey. How many different aircraft types have you flown to date? And I can imagine which one it is, but which one do you hold the closest to your heart, and why?
I've flown 152, like you said, 82, 210. I've got a fair amount of time in Cirrus SR-22s, SR-22 turbos, Duchess, twin engine, of course, Aztec, Diamond 20. I've been up in a Diamond twin actually this summer as well. Nice. And I think a couple Piper, you know, smaller single engine planes too. But the plane that I hold near and dear to my heart is the Spirit of San Diego, the Piper Malibu Mirage, the 1997, that the city of San Diego just recognized with the Spirit of San Diego Day.
Wow.
On January 24th. So proud of that. Not just, you know, to bring aviation into everybody's awareness, but to introduce a little bit of spirituality into aviation. You know, we're talking about the Spirit of San Diego.
So let me get this straight. The city of San Diego have created a day called the Spirit of San Diego Day on the 24th of January?
That's right. And it's, you know, the plane was an ambassador for the great city of San Diego. And when people ask me, you know, what does that mean, the Spirit of San Diego? I say, well, it represents the hope, the heart, the dreams, the soul, and the spirit of the people of San Diego. So we're talking about the circumnavigation, which was 23 countries, but in 3 years, that plane visited 45 countries and territories. And with the power of social media, with these articles, with the video segments I've done and the lectures, you know, around the world, it really has been a powerful tool for aviation. Maybe it's a better said, it's a billboard for aviation.
Wow. In terms of having positive role models in aviation and iconic aircraft, like there are many, Lindenberg is one of them, and obviously the Spirit of San Diego is another now. Yeah, that's fabulous. Anything to bring aviation into a bright, shining spotlight is definitely the way forward. And I'm really excited. I'm chomping at the bit to find out now. But let's just take it. So let's go back to your journey. So you're 60-hour wide. You've got your ticket. What was next for you? You've said some really interesting aircraft types there. Some of them are my dream aircraft there. You know, so the Cirruses, the Bonanzas, the 210s. I currently fly a 182. So and I understand why it was a little bit fast for you when you were training, but you've definitely moved on since then.
I definitely moved on. You know, the Cessnas are amazing aircraft, and I took a Turbo 210 north of the Arctic Circle up to Bettles, Alaska, here in the United States, and that plane did everything I asked of it. You know, I was landing on gravel runways. I was out in the middle of nowhere with no help, and that plane always started and got me home, just like the Spirit of San Diego did on many, many occasions. So yeah, just gradually worked my way up. Instrument rating, I used a flight simulator, which was amazing for that training because it's so close to the actual experience. not for VFR training, but IFR definitely.
Yeah.
And then I'm a gadget guy. Like, I like to push buttons. I like technology, satellite, weather, music, touchscreen, active traffic, Bluetooth. The Spirit of San Diego had everything we could put in there, as will the citizen of the world. So, why not use technology that's available?
Yeah, you do hear some people sort of like pushing back against technology and referring back to, so people don't lose old skills. But, what would you say to anyone that would sort of question the amount of technology that is available in the cockpit in general, not just in the Spirit of San Diego nowadays?
That's a great question. I would say use both. In the Spirit of San Diego, my left pilot side was all the touchscreen, glass panel, high-tech stuff I could get in there. And on the right side, I had my six-pack. And, it's highly unlikely that everything will fail at once. And when you're in a foreign country, maybe, I don't know, you're in New Caledonia, somebody is going to have some experience with the steam gauges. But if you're asking them to fix a Garmin G500 primary flight display, they're going to just scratch their head and look at it. So I think using both is very, very important.
Yeah, I think I agree in terms of there's a balance, isn't there, where where the benefits of the technology, and if you just go step back into some basic sort of tech in terms of just GPS navigation from the map, it gives you a bit more awareness, and you can, I personally use SkyDemon, which is a tool that sort of covers most of Europe, and that's changed my flying and what I would attempt to do. I've taken it to another level, and I've been definitely more adventurous, not quite leaving the continent yet, but got me over to France at least. But yeah, very interesting. So you mentioned your IR. Let's take it through the process. How did you get on with your IR from a learning curve? You said the simulator was a great benefit to you. So was it a case of just you maxed out on the simulator and then jumped into the aircraft?
Well, look, can I share one last final point about the technology?
Absolutely, yeah, go for it.
The other piece is that you have to assume that all your technology will fail you too. And, with Charles Lindbergh, he had such a basic airplane. There were times when my navigation didn't work because the GPS waypoints that I tried to upload were corrupted, or my radar didn't work, or my storm scope didn't work, or I had a panel failure. So ultimately, being able to fly a plane without all the gadgets is critical as well, because things fail. I mean, it's a machine. It's imperfect in a lot of ways. But to answer your question, the instrument flying, there's an enormous amount of information you need to take in. And I remember when I was studying, and I forget what the exact number is to pass the written exam, but let's say it was 80%. I remember sitting there going, that means that 20% of the time I could potentially kill myself because I don't know what I need to know.
That's a great viewpoint there.
So what I did is I remember traveling one summer. I was over in Croatia, and Jeppesen makes an amazing instrument flight rules textbook. And I carried that thing with me. It was like carrying a couple bricks everywhere I went. Yeah. But every day I studied a little bit. And I made sure that I understood every line that I was reading. If I didn't, I notated it and I would ask somebody. And over the course of the summer and a few more months, I eventually made it through that textbook. But it was a very slow process. And, rushing something like that, I think, can be really dangerous. So I shot for 100%. I think on my exam, I got a 94 or 96. I forget the exact number. But, still I was going, 6% of the time, Yeah,
that's pretty cool. I think it's the Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule, where, maybe you don't need that 20%, but maybe you do, and that's not the situation you want to be in. But I think what they say is the 80-20 of the 80-20 is almost what you said, 96. So maybe there's a sign there if you need one.
Well, the universe will test you too. I found that on my circumnavigation, and for the people that are planning on doing a circumnavigation, it sounds kind of like a buzzkill, but I say whatever you fear will happen. So you better get over it before you leave. And for me, my fear was landing in the middle of the night on an island in the dark with weather at an uncontrolled airport in a foreign country with turbulence. And that happened to me 3 times.
They call that manifestation, right?
I had a lot of thought about that, and it was kind of funny because when the final leg from Honolulu to Monterey, California is where my family lived for a time, and I've flown in there many times, but I remember it was fogged in, it was night, there were mountains all around, the tower had shut down, there was turbulence, and I was exhausted from a 12-and-a-half-hour flight with an engine overheating about 600 miles off the coast, and I thought to myself, the universe is either torturing me, like if I was going to be taken, why did it have to be on the last day,
Yeah.
Why couldn't it have been earlier? But I think ultimately it's a test of faith, faith in your abilities, faith in God, faith in your plane, just, believing you're on your course, your passion and your purpose are in alignment. And that was a pretty sweet moment, I have to say, when the wheels touched down.
It definitely sounds like a journey. I'm sure during the moment there, you were sort of like, you weren't thinking as spiritual as you are now. I can imagine some expletives or why now kind of thing, So, okay, I want to roll into your journey now. So you've got your IR. So at what point did you say, do you know what? I want to fly around the world. How did that decision come, and how did you prepare yourself for the flight before you even left the US?
I was taking my advanced graduate spiritual psychology class, and we were doing an exercise about just dreaming about the life that you want. And what I call the impossibly big dream was to learn how to fly, outfit an aircraft, and at the time it was fly it over to my country of origin or heritage, which is Italy and back. Eventually, when I completed that trip, I would, go for the circumnavigation, but it just seemed like the coolest thing you could do in a plane, And I love traveling. I love being with my friends. I love being up in the air and connecting with the planet. I loved pushing all the buttons inside the plane, on the panel. Yeah. And it was a way to bring these four passions together. And if you take those four things that would probably entertain you individually and made them happen all at once, it makes for one amazing experience.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, so what happens next then? Okay, you've got this impossible dream. It's going to take some involvement. You acquire an aircraft. You're going to fit it out. So what do you have to do? What's the planning like for a trip around the world?
The planning is enormous the first time. It's meant to be broken down into little pieces, and the same, frustration that you deal with while you're trying to learn how to fly is very much in the planning process of a trip like this too. You're going to be visualizing, okay, let's say I do have to ditch in the water. I'm upside down. It's dark. What am I going to do? And you can imagine your stomach's probably churning at this point, right? You'd be alone in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So what I did is I went and took a survival class, a place called Corporate Airparts in Los Angeles. They train a lot of the airline people. And I started to put together a survival bag, and we practiced getting out of a plane that was filled with smoke. And I would sit in my cockpit of the Spirit of San Diego and close my eyes and go, okay, it's nighttime, it's dark. I need to feel my way out of here. I may need to cut myself out of the seat belts. I had airbags from AmSafe installed, and I'm going to feel my way, over ferry tanks, get to the hatch, open it up, throw my survival bag. I had a toss bag, and make sure that raft gets inflated, tied to the plane with a cord that's designed to snap at 100 pounds when the plane is going down after a minute, because planes usually submerge within 60 seconds.
Yeah.
So I just started to break the whole trip into different pieces. The route, I had some assistance from a guy named Eddie Gould from General Aviation Support. Genius, lover of aviation, very familiar with moving planes around the world. So he handled permits, suggested routes, got me parts and fuel when I needed it. He handled a lot of the logistics. And, then getting the plane ready for a trip like that, I took it to multiple mechanics. I did everything. Like, if there was anything that was wrong with that plane, I fixed it, because I didn't want to have to think about that in the back of my head,
Yeah.
Like, I've got a bottle of water, but my friggin' cup holder's broken.
Yeah.
Where am I going to put it? I don't want to spend that 2 seconds going through that mental drill. So getting a plane ready so that you have confidence in it is a big step as well.
While we were there, why that aircraft?
I looked at different aircraft. I originally was going to start out with a V-tail Bonanza because it looked cool with tip tanks.
Yeah.
And then one of my buddies said, well, don't go for the V-tail. The regular tail plane is more stable, longer. And then another buddy said, well, if you're going to do any mountain flying, you got to have a turbocharger. And then we started looking at the price of those planes, and somebody said, well, if you're going to spend that kind of money, why don't you get an older Malibu? Because it's pressurized, has the twin turbocharging and extremely long range. So then I started looking at those planes, and for a little bit more, you could get a regular Malibu with damage history. And then I found a Malibu without damage history. And, by that time I was spending a lot more money, but somebody had also told me, buy the plane that's 2 planes better than what you want to get.
Yeah.
And what's your safety worth, Like if I had some cash and I could buy it outright, is that better than buying a plane that is in better shape and I have a mortgage, but I don't have to worry about it,
Yeah, decisions, right?
Yeah. And, it's real life decisions about using your resources. And, if I have fear that my plane is going to be unreliable, then I need to take some serious steps to make it reliable.
Fantastic. So you purchased the Malibu, and I think you mentioned ferry tanks. So what other sort of customizations did you do to prepare the aircraft, let alone you, for the journey?
Yeah, good question. There were many things because the Spirit of San Diego showcased a lot of aviation technology. But we did install 2 ferry tanks, a 90-gallon aluminum tank behind the co-pilot seat, and then I believe it was a 35 or 45-gallon turtle pack directly behind me. We put in a supplemental oil system so that I could pump oil into the engine from the passenger compartment in flight. Mm-hmm. And then we added a custom MT propeller to make the plane climb faster and fly faster. We talked about the AmSafe airbags. We put a nano ceramic coating on the outside of the plane to make it slipperier and more fuel efficient. I had a high altitude pressurization sensor that was designed to let me know if I lost cabin pressurization and my display light bulb had, possibly gone out. We were intending to put an electronic ignition system in. We didn't get that in before the flight, but I had Garmin's Flight Stream 210, which was a Bluetooth system where I could upload flight plans from my iPad directly to the Garmin GTN 750. So I would save time, engine runtime, by being able to transfer that information quickly. Yeah. At the time, the Lightspeed PFX had just come out, so I had the best aviation headset I could find. And I also had a DeLaurentis inReach Explorer, which is now owned by Garmin, so that I could send text messages, emails, upload to social media, and it was a personal locator beacon as well. But that was probably the single most important device I had, because when I was having problems in flight, I could be texting my mechanic and getting suggestions on how to fix the overheating engine, 600 miles off the coast of California.
In real time?
Real time, yeah, pretty close to it.
Fabulous. Well, you said that the Spirit of San Diego is a showcase, but it definitely sounds like Kit from Knight Rider. I'm showing my age there, but there's definitely a lot of gadgets, and like you say, you like to press buttons like Michael Knight. So yeah, I'll take that analogy. Okay, so you've kitted your aircraft. You're about to leave. You said you had some sponsors. How did you get hold of those?
That's a great question. Sponsorship is such a big challenge for pilots trying to do flights like this. And there was a brilliant woman, her name's Susan Gilbert from Online Promotion Success. And she came to me and she said, look, you've got to do something for these sponsors. And having a big social media presence, being able to go to them and tell them what you can do for them is huge. Absolutely. So, for example, there was a company called Garden of Life, premier protein bar manufacturer in the United States. They make very high quality organic proteins, vitamins, and all that. Typically, they sponsor professional athletes. And I had a friend of mine who was being sponsored by them. And another friend said, look, that market is so competitive. You're wasting time. You're a pilot. They sponsor professional athletes. So I wrote them a letter and I said, pilots are like professional athletes that cannot afford to lose once. And we play in the game of life and death.
Wow. That's
and that,
big.
that got them. And, a couple weeks later, I was getting boxes of protein bars that I was eating before I was landing because I just needed that, uplift. If I'd been flying for 8 hours, I needed some energy before I was going to attempt a landing on a, dark island runway with mountains and fog.
Yeah.
So yeah, sponsorship, very important to let them know what you can do for them. Certainly visibility is great, on the plane in terms of decals, blogs on each one of the sponsors. My speaking engagements, always mention them.
Yeah.
And just being seen with their product and talking about it is really important.
Yeah. Did you have any sort of contractual sort of things that you had to do, or bar, the decals and stuff?
This is kind of crazy because I'm a pretty serious businessman, but we didn't have any written agreements. I would basically each day in the morning when I was at my best, call up some of these companies and just try and get to the marketing person or the media person and say, tell them about the trip, how I was excited, what it was going to do for aviation, what it would do for them. And I got told no an awful lot. As a first-time circumnavigator, there's a huge risk because they're going, well, what if my company name is on the side of this plane and it doesn't make it? How will I deal with that?
Yeah, good call.
So first trip is pretty tough. And, smaller companies that don't have the bureaucratic requirements, a board or, the approval of multiple layers. If you can just get to the person who's the decision maker and get them excited, then you stand a much better chance. And, typically companies don't just throw out money. They give you product, they give you services. Here's a great tip. Some of the people that I dealt with, let's say an escrow title company that would handle a sale of a piece of real estate.
Yeah.
In one case, the guy agreed to knock $1,000 off my fees. And that's just as good as somebody giving you $1,000.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it was kind of funny because one of the companies, this escrow company, was an egg and sperm company that handled, transfer of those things internationally. So people were walking up going, why do you have this sticker on the side of your plane?
I'm pro-life.
Including my own, right?
Exactly. Wow. Well, there you go. Sometimes you just need to disrupt people's where they are. And if that's going to disrupt people to come and ask you a question, and then you can lead them into, your story and why the hell you're there in the first place, then that's a good thing. I like that.
There was a decision that was made when we had all these logos, whether we would sort of mute the colors out so they wouldn't be so bright and so many different colors on the plane. And what we ultimately decided is the brighter they were and, the more colors, it kind of made it look like a circus. And when the circus comes to town, everybody wants to watch,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I remember at 𝗣𝗂𝗃𝗃 Hill when I landed there this past summer, this was after the circumnavigation in London or near London, I had this guy come up to me and then a second guy came up and he goes, oh my God, this is the Spirit of San Diego. I watched your flight. And they certainly recognized the plane.
Yes.
So with the Citizen of the World, our plan is to white the whole plane out and have sort of the outline of a peregrine falcon because it's the fastest bird on the planet, and then have an olive branch in its beak. And with those 5-bladed props and the Garrett turbine engines, that thing's going to look pretty bad. So if you see it, you're not going to forget it,
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so you mentioned the Spirit of San Diego's graced, up to 45 different countries. So about your initial trip around the world, tell us a couple of legs. What was it like, the wheels leaving the United States for the last time before you reached out? So, and maybe, tell us your route around the world.
Yeah, it was actually terrifying, I guess is a good way to say it. I remember that morning I was departing and I knew that something was up. When you sort of sense that you're embarking on something and there's going to be there's a lot of challenges you're not even aware of.
Yeah.
That's how I was feeling. And I felt like I had made so many promises, I was going to do this. I just didn't know what I was in store for. And one of the first legs was one of the longest legs. And I wanted, like Lindbergh did when he was flying, to the East Coast for his Atlantic crossing, he did a very, very long leg to start out. So I flew from Lindbergh Field, where, of course, Charles Lindbergh left from, to Muncie, Indiana. And I forget the exact number of hours, probably 8 or 10 hours flying time. But that was also an authorized Piper repair facility. So I would be testing the plane and the ferry tanks over the United States, an area that I was familiar with, and then landing at a repair facility. And as luck would have it, maybe it's not even luck, but when I took off from Lindbergh Field, the plane was 100 gallons beyond the maximum gross weight that it was designed to fly. And I remember I got a landing gear failure light on takeoff. Okay. So, one of the landing wheels or gear didn't retract properly. And there was no way I was going to turn the plane around and try and land on 2 wheels with the cameras rolling full on fuel. I had probably close to 300 gallons of fuel.
Wow.
So the decision I made was I would try and get the plane up to altitudes, let things settle down, and then try and cycle the gear and burn off some fuel. And then eventually, deal with it when I landed in Muncie. Well, the problem was when I cycled the gear, then I had 2 of the 3 that weren't retracting properly. So my situation had gotten worse. And I was trailing a wheel. And I thought, well, if I'm going to land, I'll land at this repair facility. It'll be the world's shortest circumnavigation, but at least I made the first leg.
Exactly.
So, and I thought I'd fly by the tower. They could tell me, the true status of my landing gear. But by the time I got to Muncie, it was dark.
Wow.
And one of my buddies said, well, why didn't you land before it got dark? And I go, well, I don't know. At the time, I wanted to get to the repair facility and maybe there wasn't an airport close by. Probably a mistake. I could have landed sooner, but they did. At the last minute, I was able to shake the plane and get the gear down. Sort of a foreshadowing of things to come on the trip.
Yeah.
But they were able to fix the gear. And then I was ready for the next leg of my trip, which was over to Bangor, Maine, which is very close to the border, and then up to St. John's, Newfoundland, across the Atlantic to Santa Maria, which is the Azores, Porto, Portugal, Gibraltar, Morocco, Valencia, Spain, Majorca, Spain, Grenchen, Switzerland, Elba, Italy, Malta, Turkey, Lesbos, Greece, Crete and Greece, Cairo, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Oman, Nagpur, India, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Jakarta, Indonesia, Darwin, Australia, Mackay, Australia, Brisbane, Australia, Noumea, New Caledonia, and then for the brutal legs across the Pacific, Pago Pago, American Samoa, Christmas Island, which is also called Kiribati, Honolulu, Monterey, and then Truckee to San Diego.
Fantastic. That is taking my breath away just listening to that journey. That is amazing. And in terms of key moments, you mentioned a key moment in the dark earlier, but what other key moments? Give me 2 more key moments flying wise.
Okay. Well, the book Zen Pilot starts when I'm 14,000 feet over the Strait of Malacca in Malaysia, and the plane loses oil pressure and the prop overspeeds. And I remember when that oil light flickered. I'd never seen the oil light flicker. And I was saying to myself, before I could get that last word out, it went solid. The prop oversped. I slammed against the seat belts because it's like having a 6-foot air brake. And I remember looking over at the co-pilot side going, oh my God, I'm alone.
Yeah.
And then the next thought was, I'm not alone. Fear is with me. And I have my moment of panic that I allowed myself. And then I hit the direct to button on the Garmin GTN 750, direct to Kuala Lumpur International. I turned the plane, on the magenta line. And what's happening though is these 11 quarts of oil that had sprayed or were spraying out were spraying on the 1500 degree exhaust. And once again, I was, in this case, 90 gallons of extra fuel. About 540 pounds over the max gross weight of the plane. and it's too heavy to land. So theoretically, the landing gear will collapse, and the fuel is just maybe 24 inches behind me to the right. I can literally touch the tank. And on top of it is an HF radio. That was one other modification I forgot to mention, which is a heat source.
Yeah.
And I'm going, God, can I make it this 19.6 nautical miles over the Strait of Malacca, over the dense jungle of Malaysia into Kuala Lumpur International number 2? And, you can calculate your glide distance, but nobody's done it with a flat propeller.
Yeah.
It's always with a feathered prop. So, you take your number, then you add a 6-foot air brake, and you go, should I just ditch in the water? Because the Strait of Malacca has ships. Definitely the jungle's not a good option because it's like hitting a wall at 100 feet up above.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was, well, do I really want to go into an international airport with commercial planes landing every, 3 to 4 minutes? And that's a tough decision to make.
Yeah, you obviously had some options there. You've just mentioned them, but what was it like in the cockpit, and what decision did you make in the end?
I would say it's a primal fear.
Yeah.
I could feel the sweat just pouring down my back, and I was thinking to myself, I don't want to die.
Yeah.
Not this way, and I knew I was being tested, and very confused, trying to remember everything I had been taught. And, your mind is going a million miles a minute. And I could see what the GPS had told me, what course. I knew my glide rate was around 90, 92 knots. But the problem was I wanted to confirm that I was going to the nearest best place. Because, you set your GPS for airports of certain length.
Yeah.
So I was talking to the air traffic controller, asking them for a vector to the nearest airport. And they were trying to vector me back to the airport I left from. And I knew I could not make that. I was too far away. So I kept saying negative direct Kuala Lumpur International 2. And then they gave me a vector which was 45 degrees off. And I knew that was wrong too. And I said it again, direct Kuala Lumpur. And then they gave me one that was 10 degrees off.
Wow.
And then I said final transmission, direct Kuala Lumpur. I'm coming in.
Just to be clear, had you declared a mayday right now?
Yes. They asked me if I was declaring an emergency. I said yes.
Okay.
And, surprisingly, I thought that was going to open up just a huge can of worms. I got one phone call on that. That was it.
Wow.
So, for everybody who's trying to take chances to not do that, don't do that. Just declare it. It's not worth it.
Yeah, I've had that from a lot of sources, instructors, fellow aviators alike. Use the emergency services. That's what they're there for. And they obviously served you right in the end.
Yeah, and they're not designed to punish you for using them. If you have an emergency or perceived emergency, then do it,
And possibly a little spoiler for that first chapter in your book, but you're alive now. So I guess you made it, right?
The big story is that I felt I was tested 6 times. I just told you one,
okay,
and not in the greatest detail like it is in the book. But yeah, it was a test, and the hardest thing, Marvin, was to get back into that plane because once I had the engine out, the lack of oil, I was not sure what damage had been done, and this was a topic that everybody had an opinion on. So some people were saying trash the engine. You ran it without oil, turbochargers at 90,000 RPMs for 3 to 5 minutes. That engine is shot, ship another one out. Well, that's $120,000 when you consider the engine, the mechanic, transportation, all that. Another guy said, well, change out the turbochargers minimally. And he said, if you don't, they're not going to fail you now, but they'll fail you in 20 to 30 hours when you're over the Coral Sea where there's a bunch of sharks. And I ended up doing just a bunch of tests on the engine. And the mechanic I had, it tested fine. And it was better to go with the devil that we knew than the devil we didn't know, because there weren't any, I never saw another Malibu on that entire trip.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like there was a Piper Malibu Mirage mechanic anywhere to be seen. And, how far and at what expense are you going to go to to be 100% sure. You're dealing in probabilities at this point.
Yeah, you've got to, you're far away from home. You've got obviously a lot of experience, but albeit from where you are, they're couch mechanics via a radio or a telephone.
Or on Facebook.
On Facebook, yeah, those Facebook mechanics, they're dangerous. just joking. But I think as well, like every flight, when you do the walk around, when I do the walk around, anyway, it's all about trust, isn't it? It's like, do I trust this aircraft? Do I trust my own skills? I'd like to think you tick a box there, but do I trust this aircraft? And you do the walk around, and there's obviously a limited amount of things that you as the pilot can check, without being a mechanic and stripping it down there and then. But it is about trust. So the fact that you were able to get back into the aircraft is a testament to your will, a bit of peer pressure, I'm sure. And but you made that decision, and that's the command decision.
Yeah. And, faith played a big part in that. And I have to say, I don't know if it's a legitimate medical term, but I dubbed it cumulative fatigue. And you would think that as you got closer to the end of your trip, you'd be more relaxed, more relieved, you're getting more confidence. But the longest leg of the trip was almost the last leg, which was Honolulu to Monterey. And the plane's performance was slowly degrading over time. I was starting to lose a little bit of manifold pressure. It needed some maintenance. And I can assure you there's nobody who knows anything about maintaining a plane on American Samoa in the middle of the Pacific.
That, right?
Yeah. And, one of the great ferry pilots, a guy named 𝗟𝗏 Sørensen, he said, you got to figure out what you're willing to fly without.
Wow.
That's the question, So, yeah, it was a challenge.
Fantastic.
Definitely a challenge.
And what was the return back to American soil? Did you have a welcoming committee, and how was that? And what did you feel like?
It's an interesting thing because you're just trying to survive. So every leg is what you focus on, right? The leg that you're flying. Everything before you doesn't matter because it's not going to help you, and everything in front of you doesn't matter because it hasn't happened yet. It's what's happening in the moment. And, that's a very spiritual concept in itself, being present. But I guess I just lost the question with the explanation.
We lost the question, but you touched on something really, really useful. And I think you said it's a spiritual concept, but being present in the moment is a big thing. And if every pilot sort of thinks about it, then flying is, you are present in the moment because there's so much you have to do. When I'm flying, I'm not thinking about what I'm doing tomorrow or what's for dinner. It's about making this flight safe. So I think you touched on something really great there. But my original question was, what was it like when you finally touched down? So when you're out of the moment now, and that the moment is you landing, what was that like?
Well, there were a couple, sort of almost final moments. Certainly when I got to Monterey back on continental United States soil, that was a feeling of just tremendous, tremendous relief. And it was funny because they closed the airport down about 5 minutes after I landed. The airport was closed, but they shut the strip down, and I saw these work trucks driving there. And I remember just feeling, oh my God, I just made it in, Yeah. But the fanfare really came a couple days later in San Diego, and we had a press conference. The mayor sent some representatives, and all the TV stations were there, and that was pretty cool. I felt like I had a lot of leverage with San Diego, maybe even beyond San Diego, California. But it took, I would say, a couple months to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And you come back and everything around you is the same, but you're not the same. And in Zen Pilot, I think the chapter is called Zen 2.0.
Yeah.
Because, after something like that, you're going to see the world differently. Very, very differently.
Obviously, you wrote the book Zen Pilot, but how did you capture the journey? Did you do journaling? Were you recording? Did you have transcripts from the recording? Or how did you sort of hold on to the moment? Or did you just did a brain dump when you got home?
A little bit of both. I was doing some blogging while I was on the road, so to speak. I got more and more comfortable with video blogging. And when I got back to the U.S., I would write for about an hour or two a day. And I sat down and I wrote about 200 pages single-spaced. And it wasn't just the circumnavigation, it was every aviation adventure I had. So 𝗟𝗃𝗏𝗏 is really just half of that. But, writing can be pretty cathartic, and it helps you to get some additional perspective on what happened, why things happened. So it was part of that process of putting the pieces together.
Fabulous. And just sort of looking back now, obviously you've got plans for a future trip, which I'll be really interested to follow. But looking back on your circumnavigation of the planet, what things did you learn that you wish you knew before you left the United States?
Well, I certainly, I know that all people are connected, but when you're in a plane flying over oceans and deserts and mountains and between states and countries, there are no real borders from the air. The weather moves across the planet unrestricted. You can't really always tell the defining lines, between the countries. And you really get to see that the planet is all just sort of one. And I began to realize that I really was a citizen of the world, which is, of course, the name of the second plane and a blog that's out there on our website. But, I started to see that people, the things that were important to them, wasn't their color, wasn't their political affiliation, wasn't how much money they had. It was things like, the pursuit of their happiness or joy. It was the health of their family. It was safety. It was just living their dream. And that's something that's common for all people everywhere. It doesn't matter where you live and how much you have or, what your job is. Those things aren't important in the grand scheme of things. So all the pieces of the puzzle did fit together, and ultimately, it's one.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love that viewpoint. I posted a video on Facebook recently, a personal one, and it was just me flying across the United Kingdom, and I'm probably at 4,500 feet. There's a cloud layer below. The sun was sort of low on the horizon. And I just looked out and I sort of took the video, obviously I'm flying, but when I played it back, I was like, wow, that is beautiful. All right. And obviously when you're down on the ground, you don't necessarily think it's beautiful or everyone's tied in. We're all busy doing our own stuff, but I can't remember the exact what I said, but it was basically something about beauty and perspective. To find the beauty in things, sometimes you just need a different perspective. I think that was it. Yeah. And you just described it perfectly, but on a grander scale and taking in the whole world, as it were. So amazing. Yeah. And you're right. We're all citizens of the world.
The one thing we haven't touched on a lot is just the silence that you get while you're flying. When you don't have a cell phone or the kids making sound or the dog barking or somebody banging on your door or your job commitments that you can pick up the phone and fix, or work on, then you're sort of open to receiving. And when you're in a plane and that beauty that you just described, you're connected to nature, you're doing something that you love. And I mean, most pilots, I would say, are passionate about. That's a pretty good environment for having some aha moments and, thinking through problems and just getting clarity on what's ahead for you,
Yeah, it's definitely that me time kind of thing, which, like you said, kids, noise, social media, everything else. But when you just hear the drone, the beautiful drone of that engine, it's all about you, right?
Yeah, I remember when I was did a missed approach in Elba, Italy, there was a big joke that the thundering of the Lycoming 350 horsepower twin turbocharged engine just echoed, along the beaches, and the thousands of naked Italians that were, getting some American bravado.
The thunder.
The thunder, that's right. Was a memorable moment for everybody, including me,
Hey, never let the truth get in the way of a good story, right? So fantastic.
No, that's true. That's very true.
Okay, so talking about stories, we mentioned quite a few times now the 𝗟𝗃𝗏𝗏. So give us a brief synopsis about your new book.
Yeah, 𝗟𝗃𝗏𝗏 is a series of adventures that happened along the way, and you could say you got lucky when you have, let's say it's a near-death experience and you survive it once. When it happens twice, you could say you're really lucky. When it happens 6 times, you need a better explanation. And that's what this book starts to get into. And, when these major events happen, there's always something that can be learned. And we've broken out what I call the Zen moments. And it's the spiritual lesson that applies for flying, but also in life. And I think this is a book about manifesting too. Like, you can go to a workshop, you can read a book, you can hear somebody talk about how, you can do things to change your life. But this is an example of it being done. So it's not talk, it's action. And I think that's a much better teacher for people, to see somebody going out and doing it. And people like to be entertained. And tomorrow I've got a meeting with a production company in Los Angeles, and they're talking about doing a movie on it, which I think would make for a fantastic story, because there's as much adventure and adrenaline and excitement as there is, these spiritual lessons that I've been dropping into the story here and there. So yeah, it's about a journey, really.
Fantastic. If you need any extras, a fuel attendant at Biggin Hill in the United Kingdom, or some handsome guy in Samoa, I'll put a skirt on or anything like that. I'm happy with that. Excellent. Okay, so obviously we're touching on some entertainment from the flying, a bit of adventure, and then obviously some personal sort of life lessons kind of things. But who would benefit from reading the Zen Pilot?
Certainly, I think any pilot, aspiring pilot, anybody who's ever dreamed of flight, which I think is everybody, pretty much. Anybody who likes an adventure story, who likes to feel some adrenaline. There's some, I think, very funny moments in the book. And I think it's, for somebody who wants to manifest more in their life, this is a great example of how to do it. And I like to think it's an inspiring story. I've been told it's inspiring. And I've read it, I got to say, about 8 times now for different editing reasons. And I still enjoy it. So I highly recommend it. Oh, the other thing I should mention is that these books and the lecturing, the articles, the profits go to charity. They don't go to me. They've been going to the AOPA scholarship fund by the name The Spirit of San Diego, to the 𝗜𝗂𝗴𝗰𝘆 Elementary School, and, to further aviation. So this is not Robert getting ahead financially. This is raising some money to have even more impact on aviation.
Fabulous. So great book, inspiring stories for good causes as well, and aviation related, triple bonus even. Okay, so that's the Zen Pilot, Flight of Passion, and The Journey Within. So is this available on, we mentioned Amazon bestseller, so is it available in store, physical?
Yeah, Aircraft Spruce has it in the United States. They're a major supplier of aviation supplies and things that pilots would use. Definitely available on Amazon. There's a Kindle version as well. And I think we're going to be doing some promotions here. So if people want to go to the website, www.flyingthrough, and the through is THRU, life.com, there'll be more information there as well.
Fabulous. Okay, so I'll make sure that link to the special plus the information about your book in your show notes. Okay, Robert, let's jump into this. I'm sure you've got possibly 45 plus answers to this, but what is your proudest moment in your flying career so far? Tell us that story.
Boy, that actually is an interesting question. I certainly could think about, high moments I had in the cockpit. I think one of the proudest moments for me in aviation has been this proclamation by the city of San Diego and the city council. And, what it did was it locked into history a day, that signifies the journey around the world, the spirit of San Diego, the aircraft. And you know what? It's spirit too. It's bringing the word spirit into, the average person's day, and reminding people how important it is in their lives and what drives us. Yeah, that was a nice day of recognition. And even though I was on the ground, I felt like I was flying. Pretty important.
I can imagine, like you say, a proclamation from your home city promoting your journey in an aircraft, which you love, about an activity that is part of you and you're passionate about, and what it means like you referred to, on a spiritual level. It doesn't get much bigger than that. So I concur, and that's pretty big.
Yeah, very proud of that. Very, very proud of that.
Okay, you've mentioned also your future plans in terms of the pole-to-pole. Could you give us a quick overview of what you're doing and how we can follow that moving forward?
Yeah, a great place to follow is on Facebook. There's a page and a profile where, we keep that pretty updated. The Flying Through Life website is another great spot. We're also on Pinterest, Instagram, Google+. Yeah, those would be the best ways to sort of follow. And AOPA is also a great resource. They are certainly going to be covering some of this. And just typing in ZEN Pilot on your computer is going to get you plenty of information as well.
Okay, fabulous. So what I'll do, I'll make sure all the links, and you can send me any future links as well, and I'll make sure they're on your show notes page on inspiredpilot.com as well, all right? Okay, Robert, this is my favorite part of the show. Welcome to the quick fire checklist. This is where I ask you a series of questions and you come back to us, the Inspired Pilots, with amazing and inspiring answers. How does that sound? Are you ready?
I'm ready to inspire.
Let's go. Okay, what is the best piece of advice related to flying that you've ever received?
The best piece of advice I got, I remember I was in 𝗟𝗏𝗴𝗃𝗏, Greenland, sitting at a restaurant where they were serving whale meat. I wasn't eating it, but there was a pilot that was there doing a survey. And he said to me, he goes, no matter how bad it gets, never give up. And I remember thinking that was a weird thing for somebody to tell me, And, over the smell of whale meat, it just was kind of an interesting moment. But when I had my engine out over the Strait of Malacca, and when the plane started to overheat over the Pacific and the other situations that happened in ZEN Pilot, I just remember going, never give up. That would just it'd be easy to do that, and you keep going and pushing until you just can't anymore. So in those moments, never give up.
Great piece of advice there that you obviously carried through. And like I said before, that I love the aviation advice that you can just translate directly into your life as well. So never give up. I like that. Do you have a favorite internet flying resource other than flyingthroughlife.com that you would like to share with the listeners?
Another internet resource I would say is definitely AOPA, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association website. And you have access to videos, to articles. You can contact them. I remember the first time I was crossing the Atlantic, I called them up and I said, hey, where can I get some help? And they referred me to a website called crossingthepond.com. So just a fantastic resource, good people. A lot of resources are directed at them and they use them very wisely to advance aviation. So I'd say that's a great place to take a look.
Fantastic. I'll make sure that's linked to in your show notes again. Okay. Can you share one of your personal habits, Robert, that you find useful and believe contributes to your flying success?
Okay, I'd say the most valuable resource that I use is an iPad in the cockpit. It doesn't have to be an Apple product, but never since the beginning of time has there been a more capable device that's been brought into the cockpit. And it's such a backup for everything that we have installed in the panel. And then beyond the iPad as a backup, there's your iPhone, which runs the same software. So it's a backup of your backup, and it fits in your pocket. And I typically run a couple different types of aviation software just in case one locks up or the download didn't happen properly. And it's just a way to always get you home.
Okay, excellent. This is polarizing now. Trikes or tail draggers?
I'm a trike guy, and I'm not saying there's anything against tail draggers. I've taken a few lessons, but the planes that get me to where I want to go are the trikes. Fabulous.
Okay, can you recommend one aviation book other than ZEN Pilot?
Yeah, there's a few of them. One of my favorites is Charles Lindbergh's The Spirit of St. Louis. That's a fantastic book for anybody who's interested in any type of distance flying. And what you find is that he dealt with the exact same things that pilots do today that are doing the same thing. His aviation charts, he cut the bottom off of them to save weight. I remember when I was loading my plane up, I had vitamins, for the entire trip, and I had some fish oil tablets, and I sat there for a couple minutes trying to decide if I would use an extra plastic bag to separate the fish oil in case in the Middle East they got hot and melted so they wouldn't destroy all my other vitamins. So I was sort of weighing in my mind the risk of taking the extra weight, to mitigate the risk of losing all the vitamins. I mean, it gets down to that level of planning and detail, and he did an excellent job writing that book.
Wow. So Charles Lindbergh, The Spirit of St. Louis. I'll make sure that's linked to in your show notes as well. Okay, sure. You kind of touched on it already, but what is your favorite non-essential but essential to you technology gadget in your cockpit?
Yeah, definitely the iPad. There's nothing even close to that. It's so amazingly capable, heading, speed, altitude, navigation, fuel sources, logbook. I mean, what else can do all that? There's no piece of gear in the cockpit that does all that.
Okay, so give us your top 3 recommendations for iPad apps.
I like the Garmin Pilot app because it's the same software that my GTN 750 runs, and my very similar to the touchscreen portion of that. I run as a backup Jeppesen as well, and they are excellent for international flying. All the charts are on Jeppesen, and once you leave the United States, that Garmin Pilot isn't as capable. And the third app, just a simple calculator on the iPad, for calculating fuel. And when you're doing these long distance flights and the winds are picking up and you're adjusting your fuel burn and calculating direct courses, I might do that 50 times in a flight.
Yeah, I can imagine you just really... Did I do that math right again? Yeah, excellent.
Can I mention one other thing that sort of triggers that's really important for pilots is, opening up your POH and looking at the different fuel settings. There's one that's called Economy Cruise. And for the Malibu, I typically would burn about 21 gallons in cruise, but I could lean the plane and adjust, the setting so that I was burning 12 to 14 gallons an hour. And you're not going as fast, but you greatly increase the range of a plane. So if you ever get yourself in a pickle, you can just, that's one tip. One of the lectures I did was how to extend the range of your plane dramatically, like 10 to 20%. And that's one of the tips. But yeah, that's the first thing you can do to save yourself if you get into a bad situation.
Fantastic. Great piece of advice there. Okay, so this is my favorite question now. If you had a time machine and could go back in time and meet your younger self, just as you're about to start your flying journey, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
I would have encouraged myself to start flying sooner. If it meant getting another job, if it meant saving or not doing something to raise the money, I would have found a way, I think, earlier in my life, because it's such a great passion now. And it was something I think I was sort of born to do. There's a word called 𝗘𝗽𝗃, and it's that each of us is like a seed almost, or like the acorn that becomes the oak tree. It's small, but the whole, plan for our lives is there. And I believe that aviation for pilots or people that aspire to fly is something that sort of burns in them from the very beginning. So getting on that and making it happen earlier, I think would be something I would do maybe a little differently now.
Fabulous. And I've got one little last question for myself, actually. You've only been flying for 6 years, and did anyone doubt you with your lack of experience undertaking such a journey like this? That's
another great question. Before I left, I had 3 people that came to me. My best buddy came to me and said, "Hey, don't do this trip. Wait till you can afford a turbine. It's too risky. Piston aircraft are not designed to do that." My girlfriend at the time, she came up to me and she said, I had a terrible dream that you died by yourself in the middle of the Pacific. And then my father came up to me and said, "Why are you doing this? You don't need to prove anything." And those are were my 3 biggest supporters.
Yeah.
And I have to say that sort of shook me. I was going, wow, these are the people whose opinions I respect, but I felt so driven. I knew without a doubt that I was on my path. My passion, my purpose, and what I believe was spirit sort of came together and were directing me. So, there are people that will tell you no, but if it's what you're here to do, then just do it.
That's a great answer. That question was nagging me, but I'm glad I sort of got it in the end there. And I think as well, what you said, 3 of your, 3 major sponsors of you, close people to you said no, but you followed your passion, you followed what was within. And sometimes you got to look at when people say no and or sort of try to stop you from doing things, often it's about their limitations, which they're sort of, throwing onto you. So you really do need to dig deep and listen to yourself, listen to that intuition, your gut feeling, as it were. And, I'm glad that you didn't listen to them and you were able to share this story and be this inspiring pilot that you are. So thanks very much.
Yeah, their fears are coming up. In that case, I did something to trigger their fear. So they're sort of sharing it. It's, their concerns, but I learned that I needed to address my fears, not necessarily the things that other people feared, because it would be my fears that would hold me back, not theirs. It's too big a burden to carry,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Robert, thank you very much for your time today. Listening to your journey, I'm definitely going to sign up or follow you on your next adventure. I'm sure we could say a million other stories, but I definitely recommend everyone visiting flyingthroughlife.com and checking you out there. And especially if you're not familiar with the story so far, like myself, I'll be going through the archives as well. So I'm sure the listeners are going to like this too. Can you give the audience of Inspired Pilots one last piece of guidance and then we'll sign off?
Sure. Maybe let's just talk for a second about fear. When something comes up for you, it's actually a gift. It's your body telling you or your mind, there's something that you need to work on. And it's not telling you to stop. It's just saying, hey, you need to focus on this a little bit more. And I know a lot of people that are learning to fly have some fear and then they stop, but really it's for your evolution. And if you can get past that fear, then you open your life up to more. So don't let it stop you. Definitely don't let it stop you.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks very much for that. And Robert, thank you for joining us on the show today, for your time. You've been very generous. On behalf of the Inspired Pilots, I'd like to say thank you and speak to you again.
All right. Thanks so much, Marvin. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining me today for episode 25 of the Inspired Pilot podcast. What a great episode to come back with from our Inspired Pilot podcast publishing hiatus. I really enjoyed talking with Robert today, and in terms of inspiring stories, I do think Robert's is right up there with the best of them. What a great story, being in the position to not only, retire early from a successful business that then gives you the time, freedom and resources to follow your true passion in aviation. I think that's really impressive and definitely inspiring. Robert's business success, which he attributes to his spiritual beliefs and the spiritual concepts that he follows, are now being applied to his relatively new aviation passion and are available to all of us. Robert shared his experiences with dealing with fear, making tough decisions under immense pressure, and the huge successes that you can really achieve when you listen to and trust in yourself. As he said himself, this 6-year pilot has now realised his impossible dream and has literally flown around the world. What is your impossible dream? Okay, you can find the show notes for this episode, which includes all the links that Robert mentioned and his books, by heading over to the show's website, inspiredpilot.com. Don't forget you can also leave a comment for Robert directly on the page and find other recommended aviation resources, so definitely check it out. Again, you can find all this at inspiredpilot.com. As I always say, if you do like the show, I'll be really grateful if you share it with your friends, fellow av geeks and colleagues. And if you do have 5 minutes, please leave a rating and review on iTunes with as many stars as possible, as this helps increase the show's exposure, therefore getting the journeys of our featured inspiring pilots in front of and inspiring more people, which is the whole mission of the podcast. Okay, that's it. And don't forget, wherever you are in your pilot journey, get ready to be inspired.